I promise you won't believe what I've been through. I used to be a night guard at a wind farm. The job was simple. Do a few rounds each night and make sure no one messed with the turbines. When I had downtime, I read or watched movies on a DVD player. The only thing that interrupted that easy routine was the patrol itself. I came on duty around 9 in the evening and handed off to the day guard at 9 the next morning. The handoff was nothing complicated. Park next to the guard I was replacing, exchange a few words. He'd say nothing much happened during his shift, and I'd start my night. He never mentioned anything unusual, sometimes bears, deer, or wolves at most. The farm had 12 turbines spread across 5 miles, connected by a dirt road. When I first started, I'd get out and check each turbine's door lock. After 5 years, I'd just glance as I drove by. Most nights, I even watched movies while driving. There was almost no traffic on that dirt track. The one embarrassing thing that happened to me on the job was once driving into a ditch and having to struggle my way out. One night I was running late. I jumped in the car and sped to the post, still frazzled when I arrived. Luckily, I made it on time. After the handoff, I began my rounds. The first patrol went smoothly. Twilight faded and night settled over the fields. Thunderhead clouds still lingered on the horizon, and I saw a flock of turkeys cross the road, like a small warning that a storm was coming. Most other animals had disappeared. It takes about half an hour to drive that 5-mile loop. The company forbids speeding, but my coworkers and I had an unspoken understanding. A cursory check was enough. At 9:30, I returned to the main building, loaded a DVD, and started a movie. I fell asleep before it finished. When I woke, the credits had already rolled. I had missed a patrol. I shoved the car into gear and raced toward the turbines, then remembered I hadn't refueled. The fuel light was on. Damn, I'd forgotten to fill up yesterday. I told myself the remaining gas would last until morning. I could refuel then. That thought kept me calm all night. Night guards have to stay on post. Leaving means getting fired. I didn't want to lose this easy, well-paid job. Though a few times I seriously considered driving 2 miles to the gas station. My boss was the annoying type. He liked to make surprise nighttime inspections and pretended to drop by to see if I needed anything. I knew what it was about. He was checking on me. If he showed up tonight, I could ask him for a few gallons. Problem solved, and maybe he'd stop coming so often. Rain started, fogging the windows. The defroster barely helped. By my 4th round, the weather had turned. Light rain became a downpour. Visibility dropped so low I had to crawl at 20 kilometers an hour. Water pooled across the road in places, sometimes covering the whole dirt track. Luckily, I drove a Jeep. In the middle of a big puddle, the engine died. I tried to start it over and over. Nothing. I was out of gas. I had to choose. Wait in the car until the storm passed or try to walk back to the main building. I checked my watch, 8 hours until shift change. There was no way to walk back in that rain. I might have tried if I had an emergency can, but I didn't. I didn't want to drain my phone watching movies, so I sat and listened to the rain hitting the roof, like someone tossing marbles from the sky. Every so often I glanced in the rear view and felt like someone was watching me. I whipped my head around, nothing. I locked the doors, even though locking up in the middle of a storm in the middle of nowhere felt pointless. I forced myself to stay calm and not look at the mirror. But my eyes kept getting pulled back like a magnet to the glass. The mirror was still empty. I laughed at my own nerves, leaned back on the headrest and took a deep breath, trying to relax. I don't remember how I fell asleep, but when I woke up, everything was dead quiet. No rain on the roof, no animal calls, not even the occasional chirp. The silence made my skin crawl. I rolled the window down a few inches and strained to listen. Nothing. Even the turbine's whoosh was gone. The nearest turbine's blade stood still. The air was so still they didn't turn. That was wrong. I checked my watch. I'd slept 4 hours. The storm clouds had passed and the moon was out. Not full, but bright enough to light the ground and cast hundreds of shadows through the trees. It was a beautiful night, the kind that makes you grateful for rural Pennsylvania. I found myself whistling and worrying at the same time. Less than 4 hours until shift change. If the relief driver didn't find me in the car, what would he do? Better to walk back now, explain, and get him to fetch some gas. I decided to go. I pulled a flashlight from the glove box and eyed the pistol beside it for a long time, but I left the gun. Most animals here avoid people. If one didn't, a loud shout should scare it off. I shut the door and stepped out, right into a deep puddle. Water lapped at my ankles and seeped into my sneakers. The puddle circled the car a full 12 feet across. 1-foot hops would only soak my pants, so I stepped through and crossed to dry ground. I trained the flashlight on the nearest turbine. Number 5, the farthest from the gate. Being in the middle, it didn't matter which way I went. I chose forward and started the long walk. At first, the only sound was my shoes on gravel. The silence and the dancing tree shadows set my nerves on edge. I swept the beam into the woods and saw dozens of eyes reflecting back, big and small, but they made no sound. They sat like worshippers on church benches while I walked down the aisle. No noise. Were they afraid of me? I paused to rest. Behind me, a footstep crunched the grass, soft, not heavy. I spun and flashed my beam. Nothing. Only the gravel path and endless trees. Not seeing is worse than seeing. If it were a buck, a bear, a coyote, I'd know what to do, run or fight. But nothingness lets your mind invent horrors. The quiet pressed in and I began to walk faster. My own footsteps sounded obscene in the hush. I considered cutting through the woods to save time, but it was deep night and the moon hung high. No shortcuts. I tried whistling to steady myself, but the echo warped the tune into something grotesque, like a nursery rhyme from a horror film. I stopped. Then another footstep behind me. This time when I turned, I saw eyes, huge red eyes, about 8 feet off the ground, peering from behind a tree 4 or 5 meters away. Those eyes would haunt me forever. I didn't have time to be clever. I bolted, surprised I didn't drop the flashlight. Desperation unlocked speed I didn't know I had. The footsteps behind me grew louder. Being overtaken felt inevitable. Just when hope was thin, I saw salvation, a turbine cylinder towering in front of me. I remembered the emergency shutdown code the company taught us. Like a shipwrecked man spotting a lighthouse, I surged forward. The thing chasing me didn't bother with stealth. I could hear it on the gravel. I forced myself not to look back. If I tripped or froze, it would be over. I reached the turbine door, punched in the code, and tugged. The door was heavy. My arms burned. I slammed it shut, and just as it was catching, enormous fingers shot into the crack. I hauled with everything I had. The fingers were trapped, and I heard a low groan. A non-human howl rose from outside. I locked the door and collapsed, gasping. The fingers were sausage-thick, covered in brown hair, tipped with long claws. The image replayed in my head like a freeze frame. Temporary safety felt paper-thin. Would anyone come? Would they search properly or assume I'd wandered off? Then the door was pounded hard. The impact echoed through the hollow tube like a drum. My refuge was also a cage. The ladder inside climbed up, and every few feet a little light blinked. No comfort. I had to choose. Wait for the door to give or climb. I climbed. My first attempt nearly failed when I slipped and fell back into a puddle. My shoes were soaked through. I started again, using the balls of my feet, careful not to slip. I rested more and more often. Exhaustion screamed. When I almost gave up, I saw the top and a burst of adrenaline pushed me the rest of the way. I heaved onto the platform and lay there until I could breathe normally again. Inside the generator room, I found gear, fastened a safety rope to a hook, and opened the outer hatch. Dawn painted the world orange. The post-storm wind hit hard, nearly toppled me, but the turbine's giant blades were turning a few feet away. From that height, the creature looked smaller, but still dangerous. It had circled and was at the turbine's base, looking up at me. I ducked inside and grabbed the radio. I hit a button, an alarm screamed. I hit it again to turn it off, then pressed another and heard only static. "Anyone hear me?" I called into the microphone. Static answered. On the third try, the boss came through, annoyed. "What the hell are you doing up in a machine?" "You break it, you pay for it." I told him there was an emergency and asked him to come get me. He grumbled and said he'd be there. At least someone knew where I was. I peeked back out. Black smoke belched from the turbine. The creature had climbed the shell, and the sounds told me it was still there. I ran back down, the impacts above growing louder. I slipped but made it to the bottom. I heard the top being struck harder. I eased the hatch, slipped out, and snatched a handful of brown hair that had fallen on the floor, tuck it in my pocket. As I moved, the impact stopped. Smoke poured out and I smelled burning. I ran for my Jeep, hearing a roar behind me. Rounding a corner, I nearly collided with the boss's truck. He jumped out, scowling. "What did you do?" he demanded. I pointed. "Look." He looked up at the smoke and said, "What did you do? Burn millions of dollars." The monster was gone. I climbed into his truck and begged to leave. He drove us back to the main building. He asked why I wasn't in my car. I said it was out of gas, and that's why I went into the turbine. He agreed to send someone to fetch my vehicle. They put me on a couch in the break room, and I fell asleep. A coworker woke me and told me my car had been moved outside and the boss wanted to see me. I picked up my keys and walked out the door. I never went back to that farm. The memory of that night stayed with me. The paper the next day said a bear had been found burned in the turbine fire. I knew that wasn't what happened. I also knew the company would come after me for damaging expensive machinery. I knew if I told the truth, they'd haul me off in a paddy wagon bound for a psychiatric hospital. I had to disappear. I thought no one would ever hear the story, until I found the Bureau of Anomalous Creature Handling. I walked into their office with a small bag in my pocket containing 3 strands of brown hair. I knew they'd want to hear what I had to say.